So, I just want to talk briefly about doing sort of base textures, handmade base textures, through experimentation, really. Sometimes it's painted, sometimes it's a little bit of experimentation. So we'll take a look at a few different ways of accomplishing this in Photoshop. So this base texture is essentially made from two textures that were quickly put together in Photoshop. Let me just graph this. Got a normal map here from a sculpted mesh that I did inside of Mudbox, and another one here that's just kind of sitting over top, adding a little bit of extra bits. It didn't really work out, but I think I need just a higher res final detail. But what I'm more interested in is the surface color. So if you just look at the surface color as kind of a starting point, I've got two textures. One that has a bunch of little white dots, kind of like lichen, and another one that's just the stone base. So we'll take a look at those guys inside of Photoshop. So essentially what this is here's that kind of stone texture, and then I have so that's normal, back up, and this is the other one with the lichen and stuff like that. And so this is just made from a bunch of different attempts at coming up with a certain kind of result. So what I'll do first is I'll do a render filter, render clouds. I can try Control F back and forth. Should be doing it with black and white, so I'll just reset that. There you go. Find something that gives you something even. Just press this a few times. Sometimes you'll find that there'll be those that have like really heavy white areas and really dark areas. We're not looking for that. We're looking for something that's a bit more even. And I'll do a filter. I'll just go into one of the artistic ones, and it'll take me through an entire list. So this is what I do. Sometimes I'll kind of poke around and see what sort of results I'll get off of something. You know, you're peeking through these different kinds of end results. Sometimes when you find something interesting that doesn't do exactly what you want, but there's something close, you can also just kind of play with the values and see what kind of variation you can get off of it, see if you can get something a little bit better. And of course, having an idea of what you want to make is usually a good idea, but sometimes it's also good just to go ahead and experiment and see what kind of weird results you might get, and there may be something unexpected from that. So I just kind of go through the different variations that are here, working my way through different ones. And not all of the filters are located in this sort of filter explorer here. Some of them are set aside. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to, well, just kind of quickly show you a bunch more of these, and then I'll go back. So I can actually use the chrome. It's going to add some complication to this. And then I'm going to repeat the chrome. It's going to add more complication. And then I'll repeat the chrome one more time, and it's going to add a lot more complication. A lot of swirly bits and all sorts of wonderful stuff going on there. So it's cloud and then chrome 3 times. And then what I'll do is just duplicate that off. And I'll go back through my different kinds of filters again, trying to find something that will give me a pattern that I can make use of. So this is kind of interesting. Little paint tops here. Plastograph not so much. So this watercolor is giving me this interesting kind of pattern. I'm seeing these big white sort of blobs that are here and some underlying details. So I'll go with that watercolor. And then I'm just going to adjust it because I know I want the white blobs, but the other stuff I don't want nearly as much. So I'm going to take that guy and I'll do levels on him. So I've got this detail here, and you'll note this is what I've got right here. Set to screen, right? I've got this other one right here, which is this guy right here, essentially. And I've got another layer underneath all of that, which is just a little bit more kind of stony. So I'm going to go ahead and do another pass of this. So I'll go filter, render, clouds. Again, I'm looking for something even, but I want to even this out even more. So I'm going to go ahead and say filter, sorry, not filter, image adjustments, levels, and I'll take the darkest color up, the lightest color down, find something in between. And I want to add a little bit of depth to this, just kind of pulling out the edges a bit more. And a funny way that you can do this is actually another filter that we didn't touch. Oops. So if you note with these levels, a lot of these won't do a whole lot because the variation is so small. Let's go down to texture. Use a Crackler, and usually there's a bunch of this fake cracking on that surface, and I don't want that. I actually just want to add a little bit of highlight to those. So none of this is going to change really much of anything. It's the depth that brings other stuff in play, and then you can play with the crack spacing and crack brightness and whatnot. But when I bring this all the way down, oops, you get little highlights. I'm not sure if this is visible in the video or not, but on your own screen it should be visible there. And you'll notice just a little bit of highlighting and shadowing kind of the top and bottom. So now time to combine these guys. So I'm going to tell him to be screened, which basically makes the light values seen over top. I'll take this guy. I could go ahead and try him as a multiply. Try some levels on that. See if I can bring out some interesting details off of it. We're just looking for information to kind of filter in. So I can do something like that. It adds a little bit of something, a bit of extra details in there. And that's essentially the process. You try experimentation, you try different things, and then you see what your end result gets you. In this particular case, after playing with it a little bit, I got something along the lines of this. So a lot of playing around eventually led to this end result. Once I had that end result, then I also tried other things. There's other ways that you can experiment. So you can try something like, let's see how it combines with another image that I've got here, which is this guy. And you just start doing different variations and see what kind of results come off of this. So here's something interesting, soft light. It's similar to the other one, but there's the two variations are mixed together. This is kind of cool. And this is the one actually I ended up going with for the other type of rock. So darker color. And I just brought it down a little bit. And you get all this interesting kind of variation across that rock there. So remember that when you're dealing with this, this is a base texture. This is not the finalized texture. If you need to do something that's a bit more low res, like game model kind of stuff, then there's likely going to be some painting going on over top of it that would be doing things like selecting that surface. You have to determine if you want to make a map off of all of this as well to get the highlighting to come from different angles, or if you want to make it a part of this, in which case you're looking to add a little bit of a highlight to this. Sometimes that can be accomplished by just duplicating that, inverting one, and then just offsetting it. So you can see now I've got a highlight down here, and it creates all this wonderful indentation. And I can just control that by how much opacity I put there. Now I've got some cracking and whatnot. And that's just basically a duplicate of it that I just inverted the values. So just press Control I, or you can go Image, Adjustments, Invert to invert that, and then lay the darker color over top. And just by offsetting them using the arrow keys, it just physically moves it, right? So get it into a position where it looks good, and you just kind of leave it like that, and voila, I've got some cracks into the surface. So this is essentially the general process. So let's take a look at some other existing filters that we can play with. Under the filter render, we have clouds and different clouds. We also have this thing called fibers. Selected area is empty. Let's just fill it with something. Filter, render, fibers. And you know that fibers, to start off with, have this interesting sort of pattern to them. And in fact, if we go down to sketch and photocopy it, it's actually a lot like the starting for some bark, to give you a quick start for a painted bark. And you can use some other filters in between there to try and get some different results off of that, to start blending with that, as well as some actual hand painting, but it gives you a good base start for doing that. If we do a filter, render clouds, and then filter, render difference clouds, I just press Control F to repeat the command again and again and again and again. Get some interesting complicated shapes that come in here that when adjusted could essentially work the same idea as gnarls in wood that you could see in some of those marbled woods or actual marbles. And then also you can take this kind of stuff and also take it through different kinds of filters to get different sorts of results off of it. This, when adjusted a little bit more, can give you the appearance of planetary clouds for just to give it a cloud cover over top of a planet that you've painted. This can also be used as a displacement map to create what looks like mountain range to a certain degree. Bunch of different interesting results. And once more, you just experiment. You try something and you see if you can get something out of it. And if you can't, then nothing lost, right? You're just spending a few minutes going through and checking stuff out. But look, it's almost like a map of islands. If you wanted some quick shapes for some islands, you could go ahead and do something like this and then use this as kind of a selection for those shapes. Put that together as a planet and just throw in some textures from, you know, Google Earth or something like that to fill in the spaces. You just keep on going through them all. It's kind of funky. And so on and so forth. Another thing that you can do is another hidden kind of feature. I'm just going to take this guy. I got one here. Throw it away. just duplicate one of those layers. And this requires that you fill a layer with some gray. So to about half gray here. I'll do a filter also under render, and we've got lighting effects. Now the lighting effects is basically just directional light. That's just to pick angles. And I've picked a channel, my duplicated channel to use is essentially what would be a bump map. And you can do things with, you've got omni lights and spotlights, but directional light, if you're trying to make like a seamless texture, probably the best overall choice. And you have possibilities of making it more shiny or less shiny. You can say more metallic or more plastic, under or overexposed. You can push inwards and outwards. Sorry, that's mountainous. So very subtle bumps or very strong bumps. Can make this kind of subtle-ish. Right there. You can see I get this kind of interesting result here, which could be used for doing sort of the starting base for a rock texture. I just have to enhance some of these cracks again by doing the same process I did before, which would be to paint into them, maybe expand them. You know, stuff like that, or add other things on top of it, of course. Little details to break it up the pattern even more. We can reduce overall contrast. We can try other elements over top of this, such as noise. Add some noise there. We'll try some filter. Just invert that. So Control I. I'm going to add some different kinds of breakup in there. We just add a little bit of blur to this. Not so much. Just want to darken some of that. Try to play with levels. Try and flatten it out a little bit. It just becomes less overall intense. It allows you to add more kinds of details over top of it. Whatever you like. So experiment is the primary key word here. So let's look at another possible process. I discussed the possibility of doing like a wood texture. Let's do a filter, noise, add noise. We've got a cat in the background. So noise, blur, and we can do a motion blur. Directly at 90, not quite so far. And the tops and bottoms are usually horrible, so I'm just going to press Control T. T is in Thomas. I'll just pull the top off and the bottom off. And that'll just get rid of those edges. But the thing is those edges are still sitting off the top. If I were to grab this guy and actually pull him down, you can see those edges are still there. So just undo that. I'm going to do a select all and then an image crop. And what that does is I don't lose anything in the center, but it gets rid of any of the edges that are going outside here. And that becomes important when I want to use things like the filter other offset, which I would use for doing seamless textures, or if I wanted to use that Control T features to do any kind of scaling or rotating or any of that sort of stuff, because that information would be stuck on the outside, so I don't want that. So I've got this here, and it's starting for a nice little wood texture. So I'll go ahead and let's get one of these guys. I'm just holding down Shift, so tap and then hold down Shift. Tap it again, hold down Shift, tap again. It's important to tap it first, otherwise if you don't and you hold down Shift, you'll get that line straight there. So you have to tap first, pull down through. That's going to do that. And I'll think about the form of this. Maybe there was a knot right here in the wood. Put one there. Maybe a little guy over here. Make another layer. And I'm going to go down to a 1 pixel brush. And I'll try and make sure I'm all the way down to 1 pixel, and I'll drop my opacity. Let's do some other lines. That's still too opaque. I want these ones to look like thinner lines. So in order to give the illusion of thinner lines when you're drawing, once you get down to 1 pixel thickness, you can't get any thinner than 1 pixel. So you have to just drop your overall opacity. And so that's what I've done here. And I'm going to make these guys, oops, the whole thing a little less opaque. Now again, if I want to give the illusion of some kind of depth to that, if I want them to actually feel as though they are kind of thicker lines and maybe this is older wood and there's some separation going on there. Remember, I can do the same thing as the crack. I can go ahead and duplicate it. So I just dragged it over there. I could hold down Alt and drag down and invert it. So lower one, not the top one, but the lower one. Press Control I. You notice the whole thing will kind of look like it's disappearing. And you can just pull it down and to the side. So I'll pull it down a pixel and to the right a pixel, and then I can just reduce the highlighting. So you can do stuff like that. We can grab this guy and duplicate him. Try and do some additional checks. There's like a wood-like texture. Try some different blending modes for him. Get some interesting variation off of that. It's got sort of a grain to it. It gives you some, again, some more variation. So we're starting to get this a feel of sort of old wood going into this. And the final part of this process, in order to give it even more realism, is that you can go and find yourself an actual image of wood on the internet. And it doesn't matter how detailed it is or not. really all you're going to do is you're going to put it over top, and you're going to use a very small percentage. So it's not going to be a very strong influence on the texture. It's just going to add this tiny little bit of extra, and it's maybe like a 10% introduction of some additional details that are chaotic, that just take your painted piece and make it feel that much more realistic. So that would be, photo assisted texturing essentially. So that's basically it. I just wanted to have you look at the ideas of how you can use filters and some directed painting to start getting a texture going. It's important that you experiment and try different things out, and then if they don't work, no problem, you've learned something from the process. But play with them and try different combinations, and try different combinations of linear light and hue and screen and multiply, and try different fill levels of those different things, just to see what you can get. Maybe try and invert the image and see if it looks better if it's been inverted. You can play with levels to control how much of that final filtered whatever it was is present. Making just the dark areas really pop out, or the light areas really pop out, or flattening the overall thing so it less impact. Just explore.